So thank you for joining us for this webinar on Beyond the Outsider's Gaze, partnering with communities in visual storytelling. I'm excited to introduce our panelists for today's conversation. Justin Maxon was born and raised in a number of small towns in the woods of Northern California, where he grew up part-time on the Hoopa Valley Indian Reservation. As a photographer, writer, and filmmaker, he is committed to working on projects that reveal different variables of truth in humanity's conflicted existence and incorporate various artistic forms and expressions. His work has appeared in publications such as Time, Rolling Stone, Newsweek, Mother Jones, the New York Times, and many more. Judith Surber is an author, mother, and grandmother, and a Hoopa tribal member. She has worked for the Hoopa Valley tribe for the past 30 years in many different capacities, most recently as a grant writer and as the manager for the Medication-Assisted Treatment Program. She is the author of both Reservation High, a fiction book about Native life on reservations, substance abuse, and recovery, and The Broken Ones, a fiction book that explores Native life and trauma. Jacqueline Bates is the photography director of opinion at the New York Times. In this role, she worked with Justin and Judy on their Pulitzer Center-supported project, Youth, Fentanyl, and Recovery. She was the founding photography director at the California Sunday Magazine. And finally, we have a San Francisco native, Brian Frank, who has worked on social documentary projects around the Americas, focusing on cultural identity, social inequality, violence, workers' rights, and the environment. He is a lifetime Catchlight Fellow working to document mass incarceration's effects on minority communities. So again, thank you everyone for joining us today. We're going to jump right into our conversation, but please at any point begin submitting your questions for our panelists in that Q&A feature. Today, we're really going to dive into all of these panelists' collaborative reporting process, exploring the principles that ground their work. So to start off with, Justin, could you begin by telling us what responsive storytelling looks like to you and in your work?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for being with us today. Being responsive in my work is about being in constant conversation with the folks that I'm collaborating with. It's about active listening. It's not about bringing your own assumptions into the storytelling process. It's not about making unilateral decisions without participants' consent. It's essentially about building something from the ground up with the people that you're working with. And therefore, in that process, it addresses the needs and the experiences of the folks that you're working with. And therefore, it is relevant to them completely, right? So yeah, I think that's how I approach being responsive in my methodology of storytelling. My experience, my MFA is in social engaged art. And social practice of social engaged art is an art movement that started in the last 2 or 3 decades that is about challenging who could be an artist, what art is, and where art is shown, right? And it's about working in direct collaboration with a community. And so essentially that emerges from the ground up from those conversations, right? So.
And Justin and Brian work together on a lot of similar projects and have very similar principles within their reporting. So Brian, I'm going to ask you the same question, but what does that responsive storytelling look like to you in your work as well?
I think that for me, what it means is, Justin touched on some of it, but I think that we all as journalists and just as human beings have, we have a thesis on a story or ideas that we have about, a community based on media that we've consumed before we even enter a place. To me, what being responsive means is not trying to solve for that thesis, but going into a place knowing that that's just a thesis and an idea, and then listening to what people in a place really need and want to tell as their stories, and allowing my approach to evolve and change with that. And that's been something I've had to learn and practice. And that's how I see that. It's something that's hard. I think we all, we all think we're right about everything, and sometimes some of the things that we think ahead of time are right, and some of them are just dead wrong. And that's one of the most exciting things about journalism in general to me, is that that's okay. So I enjoy being kind of responding to that as I go, and really being consciously flexible when it comes to that, and allowing myself to just kind of learn.
Absolutely. And we're going to dive into a lot more of those principles. But Judy, I want to ask you from your perspective as a member of a community who has worked really closely with journalists to highlight some of these issues. How would a journalist ideally approach a community when they're telling a story about a community that they're not a part of? What's the best way to approach that collaboration?
So, I was thinking yesterday, a journalist who was working on something went onto our community site here, a social media site, and it was how they framed it, which came out really wrong. They said, schools on Indian reservations have the worst this, and we've seen all these problems, and we want to talk to you about your school. And they didn't say who they were first, where they were coming from. It was just their opinion about the schools here. And nobody knew who this person was. And honestly, they got pretty attacked on the social media site. So I believe it first has to come in with building some trust. Like, we have been burnt here a lot, and you need to come in first with, completely honest. This is where I work. This is my name. This is what I believe, but also be open to what, instead of framing it as this is what your problems is, I believe they should have come on with, tell me about your schools and what do you think the problems are there? And I think that would have come out a lot better. Instead, this did not work out for this journalist person. I don't see them getting to do work here because they started off so poorly within the community. So I really think there has to be some trust built first. Get to know the people. If you can do it in person, that's even better. It's hard just to see a name on a social media site, and let the people then come to you with what they think, not giving them what you think first, because at that point it already seemed really biased. And I think that would be the best approach for this community, of Native people who are very rural and have had a lot of trust things that have happened, that have been bad for us. And so you've got to build some trust first.
Absolutely. And so within the context of the project that I sent here in the chat, Justin and Judy, I know you both knew each other before that, and that Justin grew up on the reservation and is very familiar with the communities. So could you both talk a little bit about how having that level of trust already established and that relationship helped influence the project that came out of it? And I'm going to share a couple photos from that project as well while we're chatting.
You want to start, Judy?
Sure. So, it was hard because the stuff I had to share was very heartbreaking for me personally. It's the story, and it's about my family that has been completely ripped apart over fentanyl. It's about a lot of loss, and so it helped that me and Justin knew each other because I knew his story. He is close to my family, so I did already have the trust with him. At times, I would have to say, there could be times when I would get really emotional about some of this. And on his side, he's doing the story and kind of pushing at me. And I would have to just say, no, I don't want any more pictures right now. I'm getting too upset, or this is getting too in my face. I can't handle it. And so I think it helped that we had a good relationship. We both agreed in the beginning that we wouldn't do anything that would cause any more harm than what I've already gone through. And so I trusted Justin to know that he would not do anything that would harm me or my family any more than we have been. And so we just had to communicate a lot, though. Like, are you okay with this? Can I show up here? And sometimes I would say yeah, and sometimes I'd be like, no, it's a bad time. I can't really have you right now. And he respected that. And so it helped a lot. I think if it was just a stranger coming in, that just kept pushing at the story, I don't think it would have come off near as well. Go ahead, Justin.
Yeah. Well, Judy and I have known each other for nearly a decade. And she's like a second mother to me. I love her and her family. And for many, many years, like Judy and I were in conversation. You know, she would share with me the different things that she was going through, the different obstacles. And over the years, it's just like there was this point in our relationship and the way that she was communicating that like it was like, oh wow, like this is something that we should present as a news story, right? It was a need Judy had, right? That like you were looking for care for your granddaughter, like you were looking for a lawyer to get your grandchildren back. And then our story came out of that need, right? And so I mean, I work in Hoopa as an educator. Like Brian and I actually teach a youth workshop every summer, and up until that point, you know, in terms of Judy and I working together, I never even thought about being a journalist and working in the context of Hoopa because it's not, even though I grew up there, even though I'm in recovery from an opioid use disorder, like that's not my story to tell. And so just having a relationship with Judy and realizing, oh, wow, this is a need, like that story emerged from that, right? And then also just as we were working, like my love for her, you know, I just like was like, I never wanted to compromise our relationship. Like, whereas like, I feel like sometimes when you're working as a journalist and you don't have a direct relationship with the community or with the people, right? Like story is the most important thing, right? Oh, if you miss a picture, like, oh, that's an important part of the story, right? So you're in the back of your mind, you're like, that's kind of where your mind is going first, right? Is like, oh, I need to get that image, right? But my mind was like, oh, I want to protect the relationship. And so yeah, I mean, it was a challenging thing for me, given the fact that I, you know, have so much love for the family and then also just being a journalist, right? It was a negotiation, but I think we handled it really well, just through open communication and respecting. I mean, I respected her boundaries, and you know, I also just like I was there, like I slept on the couch. Like for the year that we were working on the project, I was literally, you know, whenever I was there, I was in the home, right, part of the family, and so it wasn't an evasive thing. I mean, obviously having the camera in front of your face can be evasive at times for sure, but like just the fact that I was just part of that environment, it became less of a pervasive, right, thing for you, Judy?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And Jackie, so as their editor on this project, what was it that drew you to it? What did you see as the unique strengths of this project? And how did the process of their reporting and their collaboration, what role did that play in shaping those narratives, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I keep thinking about what Judy said and just talking about trust. And also, you know, being a photo editor, I'm always thinking about deadlines. And for this story, knowing right away that Justin and Judy had built up that rapport through years of, you know, being in contact with each other, there was already that trust built in. And when Justin and I originally talked about this story, you know, if I had my deadline editor brain on, I would say, okay, send me the edit in a month. Let's publish the story. But I knew something like this needed the time and care. And we worked on it for, you know, probably almost a year. It was one of my first commissions on opinion after leaving California Sunday Magazine. And we let the narrative unfold naturally, the big moments of Judy's life and her family's life. And that, I would say we were really in service of the story, and it wasn't about, you know, hitting a deadline. And that's the way that I love working on these longer photo essays. You know, we publish dozens of guest essays each day. We have photo essays that we publish each month. So it was a really long and careful process with consistent check-ins with Justin and Judy, making sure that they had our support, myself and Alexandra, Judy's text editor. And yeah, it's my favorite way of working with photographers.
Yeah, and I can imagine in a newsroom setting that it takes a fair amount of advocacy on your part as well to be able to carve out that space, to be able to really have the time to collaborate in that intentional way.
Absolutely.
And Brian, I know you've talked about as well in your work that building trust has been a key element. Do you want to talk about how that's influenced your work too, and maybe what kind of projects you've pursued as well because of it?
Sure. I think that, well, building trust with folks comes about by spending time with folks, and not shooting. I think that we just unfortunately tend to just always think about this practice of like what we're going to create and be able to extract versus how can we be more holistically engaged with folks in their communities and a storyteller. And so I think as I've gotten older, I've tried to incorporate things like teaching in communities, et cetera, like Justin was talking about, as main priorities instead of just going in and thinking about what photographs I can take. And then, work I've done, like with Pulitzer Center, has made that more possible because I've been able to, for instance, get cameras to do work with folks that were trying to get into school and needed a little bit of an introduction to collegiate life when coming out of prison. And what more fun way to do that than a visual storytelling class? It's something that folks really can have fun with. And I did a project with Project Rebound at San Francisco State where folks that were coming out of prison were able to do visual storytelling. And then we partnered with Jackie when she was at Cal Sunday to not only do that workshop, but try to take that work further and get work published that they were making, which was, very empowering for some of them, some of the people that we were working with. So all these things build trust in the community in general, and they help people know that, like, that they help people know me in these spaces as not just some, like, someone that's just parachuting in. And these things it takes time, and it takes working with organizations and people and editors that understand that it takes time, as Jackie was saying. Like, I like to really if it's something I really care about, I think to me, it's like I have to divorce it from deadline pressure and delivery of deliverables pressure. That just has to not be on the table. And that way I can really look at things much more three-dimensionally.
Yeah, and I feel like lately we hear the term slow journalism getting thrown around more and more as part of this principle of really taking the time to get to know the communities and invest in the communities. But I also know that making a living as a journalist and as a photographer can be tough. So could you both talk a little bit about like how you balance prioritizing the time that it takes to do these projects along with the very real need to meet deadlines and to pitch stories as well?
Yeah, I can start. I mean, it's a real thing, right? I mean, this idea of slow journalism, right, takes time, right? And therefore, it's not kind of folded into the way that journalism is structured on a day-to-day basis, right? And week-to-week basis, like in terms of the economics of it, right? And the only reason why the story with Judy was even possible was because of the Pulitzer Center, right? And their support. Because I was shooting film's expensive, right? So yeah, I mean, I believed in the story, we believed in the project, the money wasn't a motivator, right? But I think it's important, obviously, like we're trying to pay the bills, we're trying to put food on the table, right? We have monthly expenses. I mean, the way that I've been able to manage the economics of working on longer projects, right? I mean, the reality of working on longer projects is there's not money in it, right? I mean, maybe you get a couple grants a year, right? It's an up and down financially in terms of year by year, right? And so therefore, like that's partly why I went back to school and got my MFA, and I'm teaching at a university. I teach at Cal Poly Technic in Humboldt County in the art department. And so like that, to me, that's a strategy that I've used, right? So I teach and I have a regular paycheck, but same time, I'm working on really long projects that I don't have the pressures of production, right? And I think that like if you're working on assignments all the time, right, maybe you don't have the spaciousness to work on these really long projects that take time to develop. So I mean, I think it's a negotiation between those two forces. So yeah.
Very similar for me as far as, but I think the thing that I realized probably about halfway through my career is that, as we all know, the media business landscape is what it is. We don't need to go into that. There is no money in telling long form stories because it's not lucrative. If you're fortunate, you can get the money to tell the story. But what I've been able to do is to work on not just thinking about the end product, which is, you know, where we're going to publish, what editor I'm going to work with, but realizing that these things take teamwork amongst many organizations often. Lots of stories I've worked on have, you know, it's been with Pulitzer Center, it's been with Catchlight, also with 2 or 3 publishing partners, like over long periods of time, and communicating with everyone so everybody knows what's going on, and so that everybody knows, you know, what their part of it is. And that's been the way that I've been able to keep working on things for long stretches. And I don't think that that was really taught in school. Like, I mean, I went to journalism school and it was like pitch story, publish story, right? I don't ethically even want to do that when it comes to something I really care about, but also it just doesn't really even work that way financially anymore, I don't think. We have to collaborate across the board amongst many organizations to make these things happen. And I teach a bunch, just like Justin does. I think even something like that maybe would have been even taboo, like to say I'm a professional photojournalist, but I do all these other things. Well, that's reality. You know, I teach online courses. I teach an online course at Berkeley. I teach an in-person class at the community college. I do whatever I have to do to make sure that I can keep the lights on while still doing projects that I care about.
Absolutely. Thank you both for sharing on that. I know it's something that's not talked about as much, so definitely want something that we want to hold space for as we're thinking about the feasible ways to pursue these kind of projects. So we've talked about trust a lot and how important that is, but I want to take a step back and think about what are the other ethics of engagement that you're carrying into your storytelling process as you're working with communities? What are the other key things that you're prioritizing in that process? So Justin, I'll go back to start with you, but we'll open it up to everyone as well.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I just want to reiterate, right? Just the idea of building a mutual relationship centered around trust is at the forefront, right? And in that process, like everything is open, right? Everything's communicated. There's nothing that's kept from the person that you're collaborating with. Like I feel like within traditional journalism, like the idea of sharing the narrative structure with the subject, right, is taboo. But I think that if we're trying to really shift narratives that have been harmful to folks, right? I mean, historically speaking, right? I mean, I think transparency is essential, right? So essentially opportunities, resources, crediting is shared. You know, I mean, Judy and I, we had constant conversation about all of those things, right? One of the other things that I also bring into my work is this idea of understanding my own history and my own positionality, and how my own lived experience has shaped how I see the world, therefore how I interpret it, right, through my lens. And I think that's really important because we all bring our own prejudices, we all bring our own assumptions based on our lived experience. And unless we're in constant dialogue with those assumptions, like we could bring those into the way in which that we represent the spaces that we work in, right? So yeah, I'm definitely constantly seeking to better understand how my own history has shaped my lens in the world, right? Also, I'm really trying to do research and understand the social context and the forces that are at play in the work that I do. And I think that helps shape the approach that you have so that you can avoid the pitfalls of misrepresentation. Like, I mean, I work in the recovery context. I work around issues around addiction. And because I have my own history of addiction, I understand those pitfalls, right? I can avoid them. I can say, oh, I'm not going to take pictures of drug use, right? So like there are choices that I make that are kind of rooted in being an ethical journalist, right? I think in general, my ultimate goal is to like minimize harm in that process, right? You know, making sure that my work unravels stereotypes rather than perpetuating them.
I like that Justin brings up the fact that he has specific boundaries that he sets out. Like he is not going to photograph drug use, for example, that we've seen that image and that it perpetuates stereotype, and that he doesn't want to harm anybody as this rule number one. I also like to have boundaries, and I don't want anyone that I'm working with to get hurt in any way. For me, what that has meant is, you know, when I'm working with young men on probation and parole, like I'm around things maybe that if those photos got out there, that they could go back to prison for, right? Like they're around certain people that they're not supposed to be around, they're out past a certain hour, or someone's smoking a joint, etc. Right? So like these things are always in my head of that I don't want to cause harm with folks. And then also, you know, that I also need to be working with an editor who I can have that conversation with is a big part of that. And then the other thing that I think is important for me is realizing that it's okay that sometimes that the relationships evolve and change, and that I don't only need to be a photographer. Like if my main goal is not to do harm and is actually, you know, the other side of that to actually do some good in people's lives, that maybe at some point I'm no longer a journalist in a situation, that I'm just a mentor to some of the people that I'm working with, and that's what they need, that they don't need their picture taken, and that's okay too. So like I've tried to listen to that as that relationship evolves and know when to, like, I always try to pay attention to what those folks, you know, to what the people I'm working with actually would really need in their lives. And yeah, in my instance, it's been, you know, lack of positive role models has always been a big one, like with a lot of the guys that I work with. So at some point, if that's what they need, I'm happy to just put the camera down. Maybe we don't take pictures anymore.
Yeah, I mean, just I put in the chat the link to the story that Brian worked on with two photographers who he taught in Project Rebound. And that's exactly what Brian just said. I mean, he put his camera down and he was just there mentoring these two photographers as they were navigating their first editorial assignment, which goes down in history, one of my favorite stories we did at Cal Sunday. So.
Me too.
And Brian, I know you shared a few photos as well from a collaboration with Cal Sunday that you worked on as well. Do you want to speak about that and how some of those principles influenced that project as well?
Sure. So I don't know, are you sharing pictures? Oh, here we go. Okay. Yeah, this is Chris and Eugene, and these are some images that they made and them working in the community. And I think that, you know, there were I had to be very aware of not causing harm. Like just as a specific example, Eugene, who we worked with, who was a very gifted visual storyteller, was like, he was afraid of being seen as a snitch in the community, right? Like these were things that like we had to address. And I think, you know, trying to not push him to do things that he wasn't going to be comfortable with and potentially become in physical danger over, and like being in constant communication with him about that became very important. And actually Justin helped a lot with that too. Like, and I think we can lean on colleagues when it comes to these things, and that's the best thing to do. You know, because Justin ended up just having a friendship with Eugene, and like I was in a more and I was helping him with his images. So like tag teaming these things amongst colleagues. But yeah, both these guys were fed up with how their community was always being depicted like in negative ways, and they wanted to make positive images of their community, which they both did. But we also wanted to take it a step further and get that work out in the world, which we did with Cal Sunday. And then some of Chris's images also got published in Vice. But we had a direct impact. You know, Eugene was very scared for his physical well-being, that he was going to be seen as a snitch and all this stuff. But then what actually ended up happening is sometimes we don't know, right? It's a super scary thing. Like what's going to happen when this work goes out into the world, was that the case that Eugene had in court he ended up getting off because they were like, hey, look, you're doing some good stuff. Like you've kind of turned your life around here. And he had like physical proof of that because of the work that was in the magazine. Like that was like a real world result for him. And he ended up showing his work down at the Hall of Justice. And that's what this picture is here. So yeah, I mean, I think for me, like, I think that we we focus a lot on the social change that we want to see, and that's important and great. But I have also found it really important to have like, you know, if I could have like real impact with like 1 or 2 people has become very important in my practice.
Absolutely. And it's great to see how you're teaching others to carry these principles forward as well in their own journeys and their communities as well. Judy, I'm curious to hear from you a bit more about what are some of the maybe social dynamics and things that journalists may not recognize when they're entering a space or entering a community, even if they're coming in with great intentions to minimize harm. What are some of the barriers in communication or understanding that you've seen in your personal experiences?
I think sometimes a lot of it is people coming in with a biased opinion already, like because we're Native American and on a reservation, people have an idea of what they see maybe on TV or portrayed like that. And we're all different, like we're Northwest and we don't live in teepees, and we are a lot different than natives that are living in the plains. And so I think coming in with more of a blank slate instead of coming in with all these preconceived ideas. And some people come in then also with this thinking that everybody's worshiping nature and all that. And, you know, the truth is there are some natives here who live like that, but most people here are struggling much more than that. We have a lot of really high poverty rates, a lot of trauma, a lot of things that have shaped us. We had contact here so much later than other tribes. You know, we didn't have the first non-Indians get here till like 1850, while other reservations and natives had people from the outside for hundreds of years. So it's still like my grandfather's generation that saw the first. So in some ways, we aren't at the same place that other natives are. So I think just coming in without preconceived ideas, besides the trust, is coming in with the open mind and letting the people you're talking to take more of the lead while you're kind of learning from them, instead of the other way around. Or if people come in with an agenda already, if they want to report and make something their way, maybe a statement or a topic or a law or whatever, they might come in with a preconceived how they want it and then get here and people feel differently. And then you can see that they feel, I've seen it where they'll keep asking the same question over and over, but in a different way, trying to extract what they want from people. But that doesn't work. Like, you know, if you're only wanting to cover it for your own agenda and something you want to get out of it, it's probably not going to work here, at least. I can't talk for everywhere, but here, that won't work. I think coming in non-judgmental too, because like I said, we have our lifestyles are a little different and we do have really high poverty rates, and it's hard for people to, like, if somebody's coming in, nobody wants to feel judged. Like they don't want somebody coming in looking at their place like, oh, you know, or we hear that a lot and feel that a lot. So I think just really coming in respectful and non-judgmental is extremely important.
I think that's true everywhere, but especially in your circumstances. So I think I'm curious to hear a little bit more about how we strike this balance between the outsider's perspective and the collaborating with members of the community. And so in what situations do you think it's appropriate to be reporting on a story that you don't have personal experiences with? And how do you use the community to help bridge those gaps? And in what ways do you find it challenging to report on a story that you may have personal experiences with and have your own emotional connections to as well? So I know that's thinking about it from both perspectives, but how does that both like help and hurt the process?
Did you want to go, Justin?
Sure. Yeah, I can start. Yeah, I mean, I think it's essential that you have a relationship to the context, the story, the place, the people, right? Obviously, because the folks, if you're part of that community, then they hold you accountable, right? Like if a journalist comes in, like for example, like I did a story for a mainstream publication in Eureka, California during the opioid crisis. And shortly before that happened, another mainstream publication came in and did a story. And there was a woman that I knew that was photographed using substances, like she was smoking meth, right? And she had told the photographer to not show her face, but the photographer did not do that and showed her face, and there were real world consequences for her. Like she ended up like losing her housing and then like getting harassed by the police. And so from the context of an outsider, right, the outsider leaves, right, there's no consequences to him, right? Whereas if like for me, like I live here, and if I were to do that, right, I mean I would be publicly shunned, right, from that community. So I think from that real world perspective, like that's important. I think there are times, at least in my career, I know that Brian also, in his work, he can speak to this too, but there are times where an outsider is necessary, partly because a local journalist is unable to work on these stories. Like, so I worked on a project in a place called Chester, Pennsylvania for almost a decade. And one of the projects that I worked on was looking at unsolved murder, but more from like looking at the sort of repercussions of losing someone to unsolved murder. When I was a teenager, my best friend was murdered and justice was not served. And it just really shaped the rest of my life, the course of my life. So I was looking at that specifically. And there was a friend of mine who was a local citizen journalist, and we were, you know, like really close, and we used to drive around together. And he told me that like he had tried to do something around that issue and his life was threatened, right? So he was like, I can't do this, right? So you're the only person that can do this story, at least in that time, in that space, right? So I do think that there are times where an outsider, based on their privilege, right, has a better chance of being successful at telling the story. So, but yeah, I mean, there was another part of your question, but I think I wanted to give Brian an opportunity to answer that. So.
Yeah, no, I think that that's something that maybe we don't always think about, because I think that correctly we place a lot of emphasis on who, you know, who really knows a story and who should be telling a story and who's closest to a story. I think most of the time that is the correct approach. But there has been work that I've done in Mexico, for example, for years, where local journalists would get murdered if they did the work, you know. And so my place of privilege of being able to be a U.S. citizen, but someone who also is familiar with the culture, because I was living in Mexico, but as a U.S. citizen. But I still was able to be sensitive to some of the very specific concerns that folks had when I was doing work on violence and the drug war. Unfortunately, newspapers often will parachute journalists into places just because they're conflict journalists. This has happened in Mexico, and they didn't actually know the culture. So like, I'm not saying to do that. Like, I think people still need to be to have an intimate knowledge, but with Mexico as an example, I was able to work with local journalists, and they could not be seen, and I could get the work published, and you know, and they just couldn't, because it was just too dangerous. So I think there is a place for that. But ideally, I like to be intimately comfortable and aware of some of the issues that I'm working with, because I'm just more familiar with the pitfalls of like what can happen to folks, and so that makes it so that I can be more careful with the community that I'm working in.
Yeah, and from a commissioning editor standpoint, I mean, at California Sunday and now on Opinion at the New York Times, I always try to commission a photographer who is from the place where the story is set, because they're way more aware of nuances and sensitivities than someone who is just kind of, someone said parachuting, I say helicoptering in for the day. But oftentimes we have to send photographers to a location that they might not be from. And I think it goes back to what Brian said earlier about not picking up the camera at first. If possible, if you're a photographer that's getting assigned a story that you don't know everything about already, don't pick up the camera, read everything you can, kind of pre-report, talk to as many people, the writers, as many people from the community as possible to really understand how to not take any pictures that are sensitive or in poor taste. Because oftentimes, you will get an assignment that you have to go in the day of, and you might not be that expert.
I'm aware of our time here, so I'm going to start transitioning to some audience questions. So as folks have questions or thoughts, please feel free to put them in the Q&A. I'm going to start with a question that is about how are you finding the people that you're collaborating with? Justin, I know you and Judy grew up together, but in other projects and things like that, how are you making these connections? How are you getting your foot in the door to be meeting members of the community and finding who might be best to be telling the story? And then also they're asking how do they get their ideas then to an editor's table, especially as they're getting started.
I mean, I guess I could start that. Like I mentioned, I've been working in the recovery context for 7 years, right? And when I first started approaching that community, I mean, like I said, I'm in recovery myself, but it's been 20 years. I was addicted to heroin when I was a teenager. So there are folks within this community that I live in that I used with once, right? But as I was trying to build a relationship with that community, I did a lot of volunteer work, right? I volunteered at some programs as a way to kind of bridge that relationship. And I did some basic art making classes, like bringing supplies and just having conversations. And, people would show up and then I would see them out walking around, and then it kind of my relationship built from those initial interactions. So again, I think that what Brian was saying is like you can start by not being a photographer or not being a storyteller, right? You're just creating some relational opportunities for you to get to know people as human beings, right? And yeah, I mean, I think that's the best way to do it is volunteer someplace, right? And then provide a resource for them, right? Because as storytellers, we all have something to offer a community, right? Not just like, oh, and take pictures, right? I mean, we have forms of education that can help better people's lives in terms of their own understanding of themselves, their own understanding of their own community, right? That's an easy translation of the skills that we have. So, and there was a second part of that question, but anyways, I'll let someone else answer.
Brian, do you want to start off by talking about how you find the people you're collaborating with as well?
Sure. I mean, I think that it depends on the type of work we're talking about. Because the reality too is that there is, there's deadline work that I'm an assignment photographer, and best case scenario, if I'm on a deadline project that I still need to take as much maximum care with as possible, maybe I'm getting a few days to do so, right? How do you go about that? Like, how do you do that? Like, I think for me, it's been, for one thing, maintaining relationships no matter what throughout years of practice has been the number one thing, because I end up, being able to call people and email them and say, hey, and having those relationships, that they remember me from 10 years ago means that I can that they know I'm not a bad guy, and that they remember me, and that they are willing to connect me with their neighbors, which is a very trusting thing to do. So really always maintaining just those relationships for, no matter if you can use them or not, but just as humans and as friends, has been probably the number one thing. And then, I think I've had really, if I'm again have a few days, and I don't know a place, I reaching out to NGOs has been something that has been, just so I can learn about a place. Going on a tour of a community with someone and not taking pictures, but they can help me to understand a place before I start shooting. And I'm doing that like during the middle of the day, usually when the light's bad, and I'm just trying to learn and I'm taking notes, and I'm like, okay, like awesome. Like now I'm like actually learning about this place. I'm always very upfront, like, I'm sorry, I don't have enough time. I wish I had more, like, but I appreciate all the help you can give me to know your community. Usually I'll start there. And there's usually people that are happy to help in some like neighborhood NGOs.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, taking advantages of the communities that already exist to learn from their expertise as well. And then the other part of this question is on the pitching side. How do you get your ideas in front of editors? And also thinking about something we've chatted about is being discerning when approaching publications when you're pitching. So Jackie, I was curious if you have any advice on that front.
Yeah, of course. I always think it's a good idea for photographers, if possible, to do portfolio reviews. The New York Times does a free portfolio review. It's free to apply. It's free to attend. I think it's fantastic. It's every April. And that's a great opportunity for you to pitch your project. And you'll meet with editors, curators, people who work and give grants to photographers. And it's a great way to learn how to be succinct with your project idea. And there's also the Filter Photo Festival in Chicago that's, I think, this week. And there's plenty around the country, remote and in person. And each publication, I think, has a pitching process. It doesn't have to be fully flushed out. In the case of Justin's pitch, it was a really compelling paragraph about what he wanted to do. And then we kind of crafted the narrative together slowly over time. But I'm sure Justin and Brian have great pitching tips for you all.
Well, I just want to bring up what you said about being discerning. I think if it's something that you really care about, and if it's people that you really care about, you need to work with an editor who cares as much as you and who trusts you and who you can communicate with, because not all editors are equal. And like that has to also be a relationship that's based on trust, that's built over time, right? Like, and I have people that I now trust because we've worked together, that I'm going to give them my baby and know that we can talk about if an image is dangerous or not, etc. And I think a lot of, especially freelancers, are really afraid to be discerning in that way. Like they just are trying to get published because of this like drive to get published. And if it's something that matters, I don't agree with that. I mean, I think no matter what, and I get it, like if you're early career, yes, that can sound scary, but I think either way, you need to be thinking that way. I think either way, you need to be thinking of, it's important who I hand this to, like, it's not like I'm just trying to give it to anyone that'll publish it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we have time for one last major question here, and I think this is a bit of a big one, so I'm curious to hear from everyone. But we have a couple different questions discussing maintaining boundaries, both in your personal life and your experiences while reporting on some of these, and also prioritizing the boundaries of the communities and the subjects that you're collaborating with. So I was curious to hear from each of you. What have been some of your experiences when you've had to set boundaries either for yourself or your subject, and how has that maybe influenced or stopped the development of a story, and how did you come to terms with that decision? Not that it has to have stopped the story, but just as an example. So Justin, would you like to start? But like I said, I'd love to hear from everyone.
Could someone else start this off? Because I need some time to think about it.
Yeah. I can quickly just, I think, because I brushed it a little bit of, for me, what that means is being aware of evolving relationships. And I think like we do have, for me, because I am a trained journalist, I have ethical boundaries of how I want to go about telling a story. And sometimes when you spend a lot of time with people, again, their needs change and maybe your relationship changes. So like I have to have boundaries of, I still want to be, if I am going to be a journalist, I still need to be following journalism ethics. So for me, what the boundary is when does that stop happening? I worked with a young man named Kane, and at some point, he just needed to be introduced to other young people his age, and like I needed to stop being a photographer. So like, I mean, to me, that's the boundary that I'm usually most cognizant of, is like, are we now like friends, and that is okay, and that's better for him. So like that's kind of a lot of the time, especially when we're talking about these long big projects, like that's my personal, like, where I start to draw some lines, and just to be aware of those things.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm gonna just bring back the work that Judy and I did together, because I think Judy has an answer to this as well. But when we first pitched the idea to Jackie, it was centered around the failure of care for Native youth in the context of substance abuse, right? Judy could not basically get care for her granddaughter Bella for 6 months, and she was just like, I mean, she could speak to this more, but and so that was how we initially pitched the story. And then as over the course of evolution of the project, it expanded, and then it became a thing where Bella, there were some social forces at work in her life, right? There was a photograph that I took. There was one picture in the story of Bella sitting at the river, and she was being bullied by her peers. Basically, they were like saying that she looked like a guy or whatever. Anyways, so there was this real thing, like, oh, Bella is like potentially could be harmed by this image, right? Or by her participation in this story, right? And so I think, at a certain point, it was like Judy and I talked about maybe we shouldn't have Bella. I mean, Judy and I are like working on a documentary as well. So it was like, all right, the boundary is that Bella can no longer be part of this project because of the potential ramifications of doing it, right? And at the same time, like, I'm also like thinking about Bella and her needs, right? I mean, there were years ago, Bella was like really interested in photography, and I gave her like a Polaroid camera. And so over the course of the last 6 months or so, I've been kind of mentoring her, and like she got a camera. She was part of the program that Judy and I, or Brian and I, did over the summer. So there's like, I'm kind of taking on many different roles, right? As someone who's a friend, as a mentor, and also as someone who's telling the story, right? So it's like navigating all three of those and realizing that Bella, in terms of her, just like what she's going through on a day-to-day basis is prioritizing her like her life and what her needs are, and what potentially could harm her, right? So I think that to me is a boundary that I set really clearly. So yeah.
Absolutely. Judy, do you want to share about any experiences that you had in working on this project where you had to prioritize your own boundaries and well-being for the sake of you and your family? Looks like you're on mute.
Yeah, I mean, it was a hard balance, because at the end of the day, it wasn't just some random subject, it was my family. And I knew that anything, I'm in the fight of my life trying to get my little grandchildren brought home. I'm in the fight of my life trying to get my family back together. The story was great, but nothing has changed. And so everything had to be weighed out. Like every single thing we did I had to look at it, what would the judge think of if he reads this? What would this person think? What would ICWA do? So I had to constantly look at every piece of information from all angles, trying to protect my family, my son, my daughter-in-law, my grandchildren, my other granddaughter, myself, but still get the story out. And it was an important story, because there's a lot of families going through the same thing. And I was so surprised by the reaction. When the story came out, within days, I had hundreds of emails from all over the world. People who either hadn't experienced it but wanted to offer support, or my family, I was had addiction, my daughter, my son, like, I love it because I get to hear everybody's stories. But it was a lot of weighing out, and it was a lot of, you know, a few things I was worried, like, oh my gosh, I actually had to answer for a few of the pictures in the courtroom when I was there trying to get my grandkids home. Like, where was this picture taken? And so I think we did a good job protecting everybody, but it was a lot of everything we put in was intentional and had to be really looked at carefully.
Absolutely. Well, I wish we could continue this conversation. Thank you all so much for taking the time to share with us. And thank you to our audience members for all joining us. And if you are interested in this, next Thursday, we're going to be continuing this conversation, diving specifically into media representation of narratives of addiction, how that perpetuates stereotypes that we see in people's understanding. So Justin and Judy and Jackie will all be back joining us, along with Alexandra, who is the text editor on their project as well. And if you're unable to join live, still feel free to register, and you'll get a recording sent to your inbox following the webinar. And then also, for those of you who are able, we appreciate you considering becoming a Pulitzer Center champion to support work like Justin and Judy's and all of the amazing work that's being done by our grantees. Finally, we would really appreciate if you take just a brief moment to give us your feedback about the event in a survey that'll come up when this Zoom closes. It helps us improve our events and make sure we're creating the most accessible and inclusive environment possible. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you to our amazing panelists. I wish we could keep talking because this was a really wonderful conversation.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.